Microsoft earnings were big this week. Okay, the bad news, they didn't sell as many Surfaces as Apple sells iPads. The good news, that's bad news too. The Windows Phone sales plummeted. The good news, they made a lot of money.
They made a lot of money.
That's the good news. Not so bad.
That was good. Yep. They beat what Wall Street was projecting for earnings.
Always good to beat the street. That means stock price goes up, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and if it was funny to kind of be listening in on the earnings call last week. Everybody, all of us who are the Microsoft watchers, everyone's like, okay, so Wall Street's going to ask them about Surface and about phone, right? And what they're doing with Windows 10. No. Nope.
Nope.
You know what Wall Street cares about?
All HoloLens.
Cloud.
Yeah. But cloud was a huge success, right?
It was.
So it's reasonable to talk about.
Don't you sort of think that sometimes, though, this is like tail wagging dog, right? Like analysts and press look at a company that is about to release their earnings and they generate a story. Like, this is the story. Yep. We're going to be looking at, what to look for, how Microsoft's, transition to the cloud is going.
But that's how the press works in general, right?
Well, I know, but in other words, when you see something that matches what your expectations, that's what you write about. But there's all this other stuff going on.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's a good pitfall, yeah.
True. But you know what's funny? And I keep saying it because I think a lot of people don't realize it, but the way Microsoft's broken up now into those 3 buckets of things, the biggest bucket from a revenue standpoint is still Windows. Right. Yeah. And it's still devices.
But it's Windows because they added in all that other stuff.
Exactly. But the smallest bucket is Windows and devices when you look at profit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is why Wall Street is so bent on looking at what's happening in commercial cloud, what's happening in Office apps. That's why, because that's the growth part of the company.
Yes, right, and I find the cloud stuff to be interesting on a number of levels, but by cloud stuff, I think primarily we're talking about Office 365, and then what becomes Azure, and you can see the natural transition from enterprises and businesses from on-prem servers over to this stuff, and so I think we feel like this is sort of a consistent thing that's going to grow over time. It's good. But I still, from my own perspective, I mean, just as an individual and someone who cares about personal technology, I look at these devices, I look at Xbox, I look at the software that runs on PCs and on mobile devices, and to me, like present day, this stuff is still very, very important, although I do feel like the cloud is the future. And it's interesting to see how these things do in comparison with previous quarters and in comparison, obviously, with the competition.
Right. Right. Us in the press, where everybody's first thing to jump at was, okay, they're selling no Lumias, right? Like everybody really focuses in on that, right? We kind of knew that though. I mean,
but it was down. Was down 57% from this last year?
And you know what was funny? If you listen to the earnings call, I think it was Amy Hood, the CFO, who said, "You know what? We actually didn't do as bad in phones as we thought we were going to do."
Wow.
I mean,
wow.
Oh, guys, listen, there's always next quarter.
Right.
Don't sell yourself short. You can do this.
Well, I mean, and it isn't a surprise because they already wrote off the acquisition of Nokia as a loss, right? I mean, a total
Well, but
loss.
they also made that big strategy change last year too, right? And I think the hurtful thing that, for fans of the platform is that you can sort of say they're going to do this, but when you say that, it sounds like you're just making something up. And then as it sort of happens, I think it's a little hard sometimes to understand, if they just put this thing on Verizon, everything would have been fine. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. But, Mary Jo and I were talking separately, I think probably on Skype or something. And I think we have this theory that, you're seeing the true cost of a phone now with these new Lumias, right? That Microsoft kind of sells these things at a very expensive price in a very limited way, but that's how they don't lose money on it, And so as the sales kind of nosedive, at least they're protecting themselves from, they sold tens and tens of millions of units all at a loss, which would in many ways be more detrimental, even more detrimental.
I mean, they did say on the call last week, just so everybody is aware, this is what they think. They think next quarter for phones is going to be even worse in terms of numbers.
Yeah, and it should be, right? Non-holiday quarter, continued current strategy,
Yep.
You know, there's no way it gets better.
But
No.
they also aren't going to stop.
Nope.
Yeah.
They say they are not going to stop.
So is it a loss? Do they lose money on phone? No, they just don't.
Yeah, they do actually. Yes, but I think the point of it isn't to be a loss leader. In other words, we can no longer claim that Windows Phone is the entry point for all these Microsoft services anymore, right? Those Microsoft services are available everywhere. I think when you look at what they announced last July, the key takeaway is that they're kind of treading water here until the next big thing hits, and that for a variety of reasons they don't want to abandon the phone form factor and or the ARM code base, which I think is very important. And so, we're going to see tablets based on Windows 10 Mobile hit in this quarter, and who knows, other device. Someone on Twitter said, I don't see it right now, but someone said, what about an Amazon Echo type device running Windows 10 Mobile? That's something I've never really thought about, and I'm not really sure of the market viability of it. But there's no reason why that little ARM platform couldn't go in other devices and make the universal Windows platform make more sense as well.
Right.
Okay. It's not a business, though.
It's not not a traditional.
So why?
business.
But it's strategically important. Is that
Right. They can't totally. I don't think they can say, you know what, we're just getting out of phones.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Because I feel like they have to keep a hand in there, at least do what Google's doing with Nexus devices. Do something, right? To have some presence for the fans, and also just so you kind of keep up with what's going on in the phone space if you're Microsoft. If you just say, all we're going to do is support iOS and Android, you'll still be relevant in mobile, but you'll be relevant in a very different way.
You make a good point, because Google probably doesn't sell a whole lot of Nexus phones. They may have sold more Windows Phone than Google sells Nexus phones. Nobody says to Google, "Why are you in the Nexus phone business?"
Yeah, they absolutely lost money on Nexus. There's no doubt about that in the quarter. Yeah, and they sold those things at a reasonable cost, by the way. Kind of interestingly, unlike Microsoft, with Lumia. So I think this is a tough business unless you're Apple, or Samsung, I guess. But things change and markets shift and saturation occurs, and who knows what happens down the road. I think just keeping a toe in this market makes sense. And I also think it kind of completes a giant grid of product types where Windows 10 runs. And I think that's important to be able to say to developers is in a very real sense. If you want to create a single app that can run across all these different device types, I think it's nice to have a phone option in there.
And as we've been hearing this week especially, there's a lot of rumors right now that there are OEMs building Windows phones that are going to be announced over the next few weweeks. So there are other companies.
About Sony, big ones too, like Sony and HP potentially.
Alcatel,
releasing.
right? Alcatel was a rumor. Acer. So obviously there are companies who think there is a reason to stay in the Windows mobile space, and they're building devices. Yeah.
It doesn't seem to make sense.
I know.
So
actually,
I'm curious to hear the rationale for this.
That's kind of an interesting question. Yeah. Who are these people and what's wrong with them?
Exactly. I know.
But it is a differentiator. I mean, the problem really, to be really brutally frank, nobody's making money in the smartphone business except Apple. Samsung is losing their shirt in it, and they're like the #2 company. So I don't know if they're losing their shirt still. I think they made money last quarter, but not. I mean, it's not. It's very. And HTC practically has gone under. BlackBerry's gone under. Apple has so dominated this industry that nobody is selling a lot of phones except Apple. Android. You always talk about Android in aggregate, but it's a lot of different manufacturers.
Well, I mean, Samsung obviously is
they sell a lot of phones.
Maybe the one exception, but a lot of their phones are not flagships, and they don't make as much money on phones as Apple does. Apple has found some kind of secret sauce here that is not something other companies can duplicate.
Sales were up for Samsung phones, but the revenue was down. So that's not exactly what you want to read either in the last quarter they reported.